So, welcome everybody to PowerShell Users Group for, what is this, April? April.
Yes, it is.
And our guest speaker this month is Mike Robbins from Mississippi PowerShell Users Group. If you have not seen any of his blog posts, I would encourage you to go out there and look at his stuff. It's very good. And you'll see lots of his modules are all labeled MR or Mr., I think. Anyway, Mike. I know it's Mike Robbins. With that, what I'd like to do is hand the speaker, as it were, over to our sponsors who always do a great job of, one, letting us have this venue, and two, providing us with some food. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Tech Systems.
So, hi guys, Nick Aldini. Tech Systems, definitely our pleasure to have you here. Love networking with everybody and supporting the user group. So, and for anybody, across the nation, we have 100 offices nationwide. So wherever you're listening from, watching from, look us up, we can help you out. Tech Systems, we provide local market analytics, market trends specific to your skill set, how much someone with your skill set should be getting paid in your location. If you want to relocate, move to a different city, something like that, definitely something Tech Systems can help you out with. So I'll leave some cards here at the back. And like I said, nationwide company, we have offices in Canada as well. So I'll go ahead and get out of your hair, let the real speaker get to it. But definitely a pleasure having you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh boy, it's going to be focused on me?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. But he wants to see everybody else in the room and not necessarily me, right?
Oh, yeah, right here, everybody, hello.
See? It's no fun being on camera, is it?
No.
All right, Mike, I guess it's your turn to have the floor, my friend. So with that, hopefully everybody's seen his stuff online. If not, you'll get to know him through tonight's presentation. So,
okay, well, thank you guys for joining me tonight. And as far as Tech System goes, they are great, because actually the job I had before this one, I used to work at, or they actually helped me get my job at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. And it was a really good job. And the only reason I'm not there today is because of Hurricane Katrina. I relocated because of Katrina. I was working across the street from the Superdome during Katrina.
Wow.
So, and I've been with the company that I'm with now. I'm like maybe 3 hours away from New Orleans now, further north. And the company I'm with now, I've been with ever since. But anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about PowerShell Non-Monolithic script module design. And that may not make a lot of sense right now, but you'll understand as we go through this session, because I'm going to start out, even for people who are not familiar with modules, I'll walk you through the standard modules, and then we'll end the session with the non-monolithic script modules. It's kind of an advanced topic, but we'll start out very basic and work our way up to the advanced portion. So even if you're not an advanced user, you'll get something out of this session.
Mike, are you actually in Mississippi or in Louisiana?
I'm in Mississippi now. I actually grew up around 45 miles from New Orleans, just inside the Mississippi border. And now I live on the other side of the state. I'm probably about 15 minutes from Alabama. I'm a couple of hours from Birmingham, Alabama. Okay, so I've just got a few slides. I'm not big in the slide decks. You don't learn PowerShell by looking at PowerPoints. So a little bit about me. You're not here to learn about me, but in case you're interested, my name is Mike F Robbins. I'm a Microsoft MVP on Windows PowerShell, and we've got new titles. I was a PowerShell MVP for a couple of years, and the last couple I've been a Cloud and Data Center MVP. They kind of rolled a couple of different MVP groups up into one, so we're kind of rolled up with the Hyper-V people. I'm also a Sapient Technologies MVP, and they've got some great PowerShell tools. Leader and co-founder of the Mississippi PowerShell User Group, co-author of Windows PowerShell TFM 4th edition, author of Chapter 6 in the PowerShell Deep Dives book, winner of the advanced category in the 2013 scripting games, and my blog is mikefrobbins.com. And as Tom said earlier, all my modules are MR, and I say it's like Mr., but of course my initials, my first and last initial is MR, so that's where I got that from. So you can also go to mrpowershell.com and get to my blog, and all my modules, all my functions and so on, they start with Mr. So benefits of non-monolithic script modules. So collaboration, when you're working with a team, and it helps avoid or reduce merge conflicts. And you know, for years I actually wrote what I call monolithic script modules, where all my functions are in one file. And as long as I wasn't working with other people, that seemed to be fine. And I wasn't sharing my code, because when you start sharing it, there's a lot of benefits to non-monolithic design. So you can see what functions change in a commit. You can find and know a functions file. You can reuse helper functions easier. You can share individual functions, and that's actually one of the things I really like about it, is sharing individual functions. Because maybe, you know, I have like a Mr. Toolkit module it's like everything that doesn't fit into my other modules. So I have like a Mr. SQL, a Mr. AD for Active Directory, and different modules. I know the SQL and the AD one are ones I use all the time, but if for my code that doesn't fit in one of those, it's kind of almost like a helper module. But maybe somebody doesn't want this miscellaneous module, they just want one piece of code. One thing it helps with, like I can go grab somebody else's function. Like I know I've got one of Bo Prox's functions in my module, and it's one for testing ports, because you can use like test net connection if you're familiar with that command. But a lot of times when the port you're testing, when you can't ping the computer and the port's not open, it takes a long time for that to time out, and his is much faster. So I just added that to my module, but all his information is in there, like his name and that stuff, so he's getting credit for it. Well, there's another one I grabbed from another MVP in Europe, and his is actually one for creating self-signed SSL certificates. And it's a really good module. You can use it for like desired state configuration and different things. But he actually signed his script, and since it's a function in an individual script, I don't have to break the signing or copy his code out of it or anything like that. I can just grab the entire script, make it part of my module, and then, you know, he still gets credit. All his information is in there, but I can make it part of my module. So I've got a couple more slides at the end, but that's it for right now. And actually, when I updated the font size on this code, I actually went ahead and pushed another copy out to GitHub of this presentation, so it is current. It was just updated. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, just stop me, because I would rather cover it while we're in that section. And you know, this is very informal, at least in my opinion. You guys are here to learn, so I don't want to just preach to you, you know, and talk over your head. If there's something you don't understand, we can cover that more in depth. Okay, and I've got this broke down into regions. So I'm using the PowerShell ISE, but I have the ISE steroids add-on, which is written by a PowerShell MVP named Tobias. And it's there's a few features I like about it, and this is certainly not a marketing session, but one thing I do like, the number one feature I like, is I can break out the output pane. So I have 3 monitors, and that's how, you know, I can see you guys on one monitor, and I got Twitter on the other one, and then I'm presenting on my main monitor. But I can drag this over to another monitor, and I can have full screen code on one screen and then the output on another one. And then I generally put my PowerShell console on another window. So when I close this out, since I'm only sharing one screen, we'll keep it like this. So I've got some prep for the presentation here. And of course, if I run the entire script, and I used to put break at the top of these scripts, but I found that break actually doesn't always break. It's really designed to break out of a loop and not break out of a script. So I just put start sleeping here for 30 minutes. So if it's taking a long time for my script to run, if I hit F5 instead of F8, then hey, it's going to hang at this point and not run the entire script, because otherwise the demo would be over. Okay, so we've set the font size. I figure, there's a scroller bar over here. I could do this in the graphical user interface, but why do that when I can do it in PowerShell? So we're going to be working out of a demo folder. And I write my demos so I can actually run this on any machine. It doesn't necessarily have to be this machine. So just in case the demo folder doesn't exist, and we'll go ahead and change into that folder. I like to show the prep I do for a session because there's a lot of sessions when I used to be new to PowerShell I would walk into, and it's like the presenter's doing all this prep work, and it's like, how did you get to where you started at? Okay, so you'll see a lot of people, they'll dot source functions. And if you're not familiar with that, it is somewhat confusing. So we'll start at that point and then we'll work our way up to modules. So we're just going to create a new file and we're going to open it in a new tab. So now we've got a file called get Mr. PS version. And I'm going to inject some code into it so I don't have to do a bunch of copying and pasting. And this is another feature I like about this ISC steroids. It says, hey, you modified this file outside of the ISC editor. Do you want to reload it? I can say yes, and it reloaded my file. So if I go over here, well, actually, if I try to just if I call the script, so if I call the script, if you notice, I didn't get any output. And if I try to call the function that's in that script, I get an error, and it says, hey, it doesn't exist. And that's one thing I would tell people in PowerShell is always read the error message, because generally they're pretty good. Some of them aren't, but this one is. So when you dot source a function, the function should exist on the function PS drive, and you'll notice it doesn't. Well, if you're familiar with what scope is in PowerShell, this is a scoping issue because we ran the script and the function was loaded into the script scope. But when the script exited, it basically deleted the function. It took the function with it. It deleted that scope. So when somebody is dot sourcing a function, what they're doing is dot sourcing the PS1 file that contains the function. So what it is, it's a dot space and then the path to the function. So I could run it. I'm actually in the folder, so this file exists in the folder. That's why I can specify it this way. So I actually just loaded it. You could also specify the full path to the file. Or if you have the part of the path, so this is a relative path, the full path, and if you have part of the path stored in a variable, you can use that as well. So of course in path, when we did our prep, I stored demo in it, c:/demo. So any of these would work fine. They all do the same thing. So now if I call this function, this get Mr. PS version function, of course, it gets my PowerShell version. Very simple. I don't have any complicated functions in here because it's I want you to understand what's going on here, and I don't want to overcomplicate things. But if I look at the function PS drive, that function actually exists on that drive. And this is dot sourcing functions is fine when you're prototyping. It's not so good when you're actually sharing code with other people. So I'll do this when I'm prototyping something, but not when I'm sharing code. And the only way, so when your functions are in a module, you can actually remove the module, and it doesn't like delete the module, but it removes it from memory. Well, the only way to get rid of a function that you've dot sourced is delete it off the function PS drive, and we'll do that a little bit later. So that's dot sourcing functions. So that's, if you're not writing modules and you're writing functions, that's probably what you're doing. Do we have any questions at this point? Okay. So, and this is kind of a side note here. I ran into some file encoding issues. New item doesn't have a parameter to control the file encoding. So let's just clear our screen. Let's see. Okay. So, and there's not one there. I just wanted to show you that there's not a way to control the file encoding. So let's get the file encoding type that for the get Mr. PS version file that we created earlier. You see it's UTF-7. Well, the problem is that's not the same file encoding that you have if you create a file in the GUI, in the graphical user interface. So I'm going to create a file, and this time I'm going to copy and paste, because I don't want to create this programmatically. I want to actually create it in the GUI. So we'll save it as the same name, and this is typically what I do. I actually save my my files as the same name as the function. So we'll just save it right here. Okay, so if we look at the file encoding for that file, let's see, and it says it's UTF. Maybe I didn't run this. So let's clear the screen. Let's run it again. What actually is UTF-7? Okay. Oh, okay, I see what's going on. Let's make sure where we saved this at. Yeah, see, I saved it in another location. So let's clear our screen. Okay, so it's UTF-8 if you create a file in the graphical user interface. Now, what I learned when I presented this for my user group back in January, and what I learned from one of the attendees is you can create the file with a new item, and when you add content to it with set content, you can actually change the file encoding with it. So if you look at this, encoding is the next to the last parameter there. And if I took a look at the help for that, it would show me all the different types of file encodings I could use. And it's not all the encodings, but it's at least the ones I would want to use. So if you're going to use new item to create a new file, you probably want to set the file encoding. Now, I haven't found any problems with the different encodings, but if I want things to be the same, so if I create it in the GUI, I want it to be the same from the command line. Okay. So what we've done, we've actually just updated the file. We set the same content, but we were able to control the encoding this time. So this is the one that had the UTF-7 encoding. And if I check the encoding again, you'll notice now it's a UTF-8. I want to show you one of the built-in modules, the archive module, which was added with PowerShell version 5. So it's got UTF-16, and I can't explain why it's got that file encoding, but it is different. But I'm not going to worry about that because that's not how it is if I created it in the ISE. So now if I look at the function PS drive, I can see I didn't load the second one I created, the get Mr. computer name. I didn't load that one. So the way to get rid of a function that you've loaded by dot sourcing is to remove it, or it deletes it from the function PS drive. So now if I try to see what's on the function PS drive, there's none on there that start with get Mr. Okay. So a script module in PowerShell, and I've got this here. I'm not going to read it word for word, but you guys, if you download this, you know, it'll make sense to you if you look at this like a month later or whatever. But a script module in PowerShell is a file containing one or more functions saved in a PSM1 file. And one thing, you know, be sure to use approved verbs. So you can run get verb, and I normally sort by the verb. So this gives you a list of approved verbs. And it tells you kind of how it's used. It's used with data, it's used with security, and so on. Now you can use it other ways as long as it's in this list. But if you're having a hard time choosing between two verbs, that may help you to, you know, narrow it down to one of them. I've also got some URLs posted in here. There's a list online of approved verbs. Now you would think that you would use new module to create a new module in PowerShell, a new script module. but that's actually not true. So if you look at the help for new module, it's used to create a dynamic module from a script block. And I rarely see people use these. So I can actually create a module, a dynamic module like it's talking about, and I'm going to use an unapproved verb because I want to show you the message that you get. And if you use PowerShell very long, you probably run into this with like the older SQL modules. They had some unapproved verbs. They've resolved that with the 2016 modules. Okay, so I just created a module that's loaded into memory. And it only exists in memory. It doesn't exist on disk. And this is the function that it contains. But you'll see I imported it at the very end, and it's using an unapproved verb. And this is the message you'll get. And that's the reason to use an approved verb, because it makes your module look unprofessional if you don't use an approved verb. Okay, so now I'll just remove that module.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to create a directory for a module called my module. Okay, so and it's under the demo folder. Now, the way that I was creating files and getting the encoding type I want was with that out file. And you'll notice that this ISC steroids program says, hey, something needs to pipe output to this out file commandlet. But it's not as smart as it thinks it is, because you don't have to pipe anything to out file. You can create an empty file with out file. So, and I just did that. So now you can see by default it's a UTF-16, but outfile does have a parameter to control the encoding, and it's the third one on the list here. So if I look at the encoding options for that particular parameter, what you'll notice is there's actually more options for this particular encoding parameter. So I can specify the UTF-8 when I create the file, and I'll just use the force parameter to overwrite the file that I already created. So now if I take a look at the encoding, you'll notice it's UTF-8. So I can create the file and set the encoding in one shot. Okay, so we're going to create a PSM1 file. Let's see, let's see. There we go. So we've opened it in a new tab. So we're going to take the two previously used functions, these functions, and we're going to add them to our module. And typically you would type this out into your module, you know, or you would copy and paste it from somewhere else, a prototype function that you created. I'm just injecting it in. I'm putting it in a here string and then injecting it into the file. And it's so that I can run through the demo without having to do a lot of typing or copying and pasting. So notice I've got two functions. So, and this is saved already. So this alone is a script module. So what happens when I try to call one of the functions? It doesn't exist. Well, in order to take advantage of the module auto loading, our script module's got to be in one of the predefined paths. There's a user path and there's an all users path, and then there's also a system path for modules. So let's take a look at where this module actually exists. And I know this is a little hard to see, but it's in C drive demo, and it's in a folder. The folder name for your module, it has to be the same base name as the PSM1 file, or the module auto loading won't work. And it won't work currently because it's not in the right path. So I want to show you where these paths are. There's actually an environment variable called PS module path. So we'll take a look at that. I've got a few extras here because I've got the AWS tools installed. I've got SQL installed. This is the machine I use every day at work, so it's my production machine. I want to clear this. I want to show you the individual paths. So these are the three default ones. And I want to talk about each one of these a little bit because these are really important. So this first path here is actually the user that I'm running PowerShell as. And typically what I recommend putting in there is modules that you're writing, you're prototyping. Now, I actually rarely use this because I use 3 different domain accounts. I use one that's a standard user, a domain user, and that's how I log into my computer. I have a second account that's a local admin domain user, and that's how I run PowerShell. So if I went to my documents and looked for this, it's not going to be in the same place as what's specified here, because this is a different user that PowerShell is being run as. And then what I do, I have a domain admin, a domain user, and I'll actually store those. I'll run get credential and store those credentials in a variable. And on a command by command basis, I'll elevate. So I'm only using exactly the privileges that are required for each command. Now, some commands don't have a credential parameter, and occasionally I'll have to run like the PowerShell console as a domain admin for that reason, but that's on a rare occasion. And I used to log into my computer as a local administrator domain user, but what I found is if you're surfing the internet on that computer, that you're just asking to get some drive-by malware. And I've had to reload my computer a lot less since I started logging in as a standard user. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the second path. This is where I store all my modules. And if you install something from the PowerShell gallery using PowerShell Get, which is a feature that was added with PowerShell 5, and since then they've actually made it available as a standalone MSI file you can install on PowerShell 3 and 4. So if you go to GitHub under PowerShell, the PowerShell team has several repositories out there, and you can download PowerShell Get for those older versions. But when you run like install module -name Mr. Toolkit to install my toolkit that's out there, and actually I don't know, this machine should have it. So if I ran find module and ran name Mr. Toolkit, so if you actually ran this would find the module, and then you could pipe this to install module, or you could just run install module if you know what you're looking for. So anyway, if you install this, it's going to install it in the all users path by default. And there's actually a scope parameter to install it in the user path if that's where you would prefer it to install to. There's a third path, and the third one is actually the one I want to talk about most. And it's not going to take me very long. It's just very important what I've got to say about it. So in C Windows System 32, users and even PowerShell administrators, as you might call yourself, IT pros, developers, whoever, you shouldn't be putting anything in this path. This is where Microsoft puts their stuff. Now, previously, if you look at some of the help documents, it'll tell you otherwise because they're older documents, and the user path was added with PowerShell version 4. So previously, your only 2 options to get module auto loading to work in PowerShell 3 with the default environment variable was to either put it in your user path or to put it in the System 32 path. But I've been told by the PowerShell team, don't put modules in this path. And that's why when you install something from the PowerShell gallery, you don't even, with PowerShell Get, or if you have an internal NuGet repository, there's no options with those PowerShell Get commandlets to install into this path. Okay, and there's several preference variables, and the one particular one that could affect your module autoloading is the PS module autoloading preference variable. And what I tell people is don't mess with this. But if you're on a strange machine and the module autoloading is not working, but you've got a new version of PowerShell, and what I mean by new is 3 or higher, then take a look at this preference variable. And what I thought at one time is if I set it to none, I would get the version 2 type response from it, that it would when it says none, it means none. And that means even some of the default core commandlets that you expect to work, they don't auto load either. You have to manually load them. So all is the default, And actually, if you check this variable, it won't even have a setting, but it uses all if it's not set. Okay, so what we're going to do at this point is we're going to move that module that we created into the all users path so that it'll auto load. So now I haven't done anything but move the module. I haven't imported the module. I haven't done anything whatsoever, but I can call one of the commands and it'll work. And so the name of my computer is SR71.
I'm surprised it isn't MR71.
That would be too easy to guess if I did something on the network, you know. Actually, somebody did track me down. I used to, years ago when I worked at a mortgage company, they used to use first name and last initial. And that was Mike R was already taken, so I got Mike RO, and people started calling me Micro. So I used to use that for my computer name. And if you noticed on my blog site, I sign all my blogs with the micro symbol. So that's where that comes from. And anyway, that's a side note. Okay. So all script modules, now we're going to talk about module manifest. All script, and the module that we just created did not have a manifest, but all script modules should have a manifest. And it's a PSD1 file that contains metadata about your module. And there actually is a commandlet new module manifest for creating these. And you know, I've got some notes here. Path is the only value that's required, but if you only put path, it's not going to work. You've got to have root module. And I'm sure I've got that here somewhere. I don't see where I put that in here, but yeah, there it is. So if root module is not specified, it won't work. I have a whole blog article about that. And it's also a good idea to specify the author and description. Description is something I used to not specify, but if you want to publish a module to the PowerShell gallery, those are required. Or if you want to, even if you want to publish it to an internal NuGet repository using the PowerShell get commandlets, you've got to have that because there's some checking they do. And there's actually a test module manifest commandlet that they're using behind the scenes. So if you run get module, and we'll run get module on the one we just created, you'll notice the version is 0.0. That's a dead giveaway that this doesn't have a module manifest, because I don't know anybody who creates anything that would be 0.0. It might be 0.1 or 0.01 or something, but it shouldn't be 0.0. So we'll create a new module manifest. And new module manifest works a little bit differently in PowerShell. It changed somewhere, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So what you have to be careful of is you're used to using these commandlets, and then a new version comes out, and it's a slight change that nobody notices, but then maybe you have a demo like I have here, and it no longer works. Or maybe you have some production code, and it no longer works. So the only thing I've specified is a path. So we'll open this up, take a look at it. So I don't have a root module specified. But you'll also notice that there's nothing, so functions to export is an empty array. So is commandlets to export. Variables to export has a star, and aliases to export is an empty array. The two important ones here is the functions to export and the commandlets to export. Depending on what options you specify, these will be different. And there's like no rhyme or reason to this. So what you could do, okay, let's remove our module to make sure it's not loaded in memory. And we'll run get command on our module. We'll notice now it didn't it appears it didn't auto load. So I'll import the module just to make sure it's imported. I'll run get command on it. Notice it didn't return anything. And I haven't deleted this. The only thing I did was create a module manifest. But the problem is I didn't specify a root module. So when I run get module, you can see it, but there's no exported commands. So I'll update the module manifest and specify the root module. But since functions to export is an empty array, it still won't work. So I can actually import the module again and use a force parameter. What that keeps me from having to do is remove the module and then re-add it. Because if it's already imported and you import it again, it actually won't import it again. So if I run get commands, still no commands, and still no exported commands. And I can add the rest of my stuff, the description, the author, and so on. I'll get the same thing. I'll just run all three of these. So the same thing we got before. And I'll add the company name. But it's going to be the same problem. Now, if I create the module manifest and simply specify everything I just specified, and what I want you to notice is there is a functions to export and a commandlets to export parameter, but I'm not specifying those. I'm only specifying the same options as when I created it and when I updated it those numerous times. So we're actually going to open that up again. So it's the same options. Now, one thing I would tell you is once you create a manifest, don't do as I do, do as I say. Don't recreate it. That's only for the purposes of this demo to show you inconsistencies. But you want your GUID to stay the same because that's used for some tracking stuff. That's how it knows it's the same module if you're updating from one version to another. And that's one, I keep talking about this PowerShell get thing. That's one of the benefits of that. And if you go out to, not last year, but the year before last in Charlotte, I presented a session on PowerShell get at the PowerShell Summit, and it's available. I may have a link into this, but you can go to my blog or go to YouTube and find it. Okay, so let's jump back down to where we were before. Now, I want to show you, let me make sure I make my point here. I want you to notice the functions to export and the commandlets to export. It has an asterisk in it now.
That's after you specified the ones that are required?
That's so that the difference is I specified everything when I created it.
But you didn't specify those, right?
No, I didn't specify those. But I think it's because I specified a root module. So it actually found, hey, there's functions in that root module. And since I didn't specify, it tried to help me out by putting an asterisk in there.
I've always been hand editing mine. That's a handy tip.
So I actually don't recommend putting asterisks in here. And I'll show you why here in just a second. It's actually, it works okay if you're putting all your functions in one file. But if you're putting your functions in separate files like the non-monolithic design, it creates some problems. It also slows it down a little bit because it's got to figure out the function names for itself instead of you specifying them statically. Okay, so we're done with that section. Let's just close this out. We're going to take a look at some built-in modules. So the archive module is one we looked at before. Let's just look at it real quick. You'll notice there's only 2 exported commands. Of course, there's a couple of different ways to see that. I can see it here too. So there's only compress archive and expand archive. I'm going to open up the PSM one and the PSD one. So the script, it is a script module, although it's written by Microsoft, and it has a module manifest. Now it looks like they generated this from something because the format is a lot different. So this is what their manifest looks like. So they've got just the options they set for the most part. And actually, if you don't set these to an open array or an empty array, they will default to an asterisk. But what I want you to notice, for 2 functions, this is a monolithic script module because all the functions are in one file. So if I scroll down, you'll notice 1,200 lines of code for two functions. So imagine if maybe you know what line something is on, and then you go modify a function before it, what pushes everything down. And then if you're working with another team member, then the possibility of getting merge conflicts. And to me, just trying to keep up with a 1,200 line file is just insanity. Well, the reason this is so, the reason it's actually got private and public functions in it. And I couldn't find anything to show me that. So I actually wrote something myself here. It's actually a one-liner, even though it's on, I think it's a one-liner, looks like it. That doesn't really matter, but you'll notice there's a lot of private functions and there's public ones. So the only thing I did was parse the file and just, I did some text parsing, you know, what everybody always says don't do with PowerShell, but if you have to do text parsing, then that's what you do. So I just parsed the text and parsed out all the functions. So let's take a look at the PS Script Analyzer module. And what I want to show you here is PowerShell version 5, and I want to make the output a little bit larger. So PowerShell version 5 actually introduced what's called side-by-side versioning. So prior to PowerShell version 5, you would have the folder like I showed you earlier, and you would have your files directly in the PS Script Analyzer folder. But what you have in this scenario is you actually have version folders, and in each version folder, you have different versions of the same module. So every time you run, there's an update module commandlet that's part of the PowerShell get I keep talking about. And every time you run it, it doesn't upgrade your existing module. It downloads a new version and installs it. So you'll end up with like 75 different versions of the same module, but you can go import a specific version if you have something that requires it. So you can use, maybe you know that 1.9 works with your production environment, so you can keep using it while you're testing another version. But this doesn't work in versions prior to PowerShell version 5, so it's just something to be aware of. And I'll show you the file structure a little bit. So this, I actually just ran a get child item or a directory on the PS Script Analyzer folder, and these are all the folders underneath it. So if I look at, if I run the recursive parameter and look at with depth of 1, because this is a real deep file structure, you'll notice that every version has its own files. So they're totally independent of one another. And I'm not aware of anything that goes out and cleans that up or any commandlets that clean it up. So it may be something you want to clean up at some point as well. Okay, so I talked just a little bit about public and private functions, but let's talk a little bit more about this. There's a couple of different ways to keep your functions private, so they can only be, and what that means is they can only be accessed by other functions within that module. They can't be accessed by you or by functions in other modules. So I'm going to remove the module manifest that we created. It's probably best if we go ahead and close these out before we try to remove it. It will let me remove it if it's open in here. Okay. So what I'm going to do, let me just go ahead and run this. So export module member, you can specify specific functions, and this is used in the script module. So what this is doing, this is actually, we'll open this file. So it created 2 functions in a script module, and it added export module member, and only this function is being exported. So the get Mr. Computer Name function is not being exported. So I could call that function from this one, but not from anything outside of this module. But I can call this the function that's exported from outside the module. In other words, when you run, and I think I have this in here, yeah, when you run get command, you won't even, just like we saw that earlier in the archive module, you won't even know that those functions exist. Now you can do it that way, but if there's a better way to do this if you're going to create a module manifest. So we'll recreate our module manifest. We'll open up that module manifest. And I'm just going to update the content. I'm going to remove the export module member in the script module. So you'll notice the export module member is gone. So now if I run git command on my module, what we've got to do is re-import this module. So now if I run git command on it, you'll see by default it exports both functions. And that's because functions to export is set to an asterisk. So I'm going to update the module manifest, and there's a functions to export section that I just showed you, and instead of an asterisk, we're going to change it to get Mr. Computer Name, the other function, the one we didn't export last time, just to show you that it does work a little bit differently.
Can you send that a hash table?
Yes. Well, actually, it's going to be an array.
Or it's just an array?
It's an array, yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes I get these confused with hash tables because it looks so similar.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so let's re-import the module. Now we'll run git command, and we only have that one exported. So it's that simple. So you would either specify it with export module member in the script module, or you would specify it with functions to export. But what I want to show you, and we're going to see this here in a minute. I know I have it part of the demo. Well, right now, commandlets to export is set to an empty array, which is what you want. You do not want asterisks, and I'll show you the danger of having asterisks in this. And you would only know this if you had this problem. Okay, so now we're getting to the non-monolithic script module part here, which is what this session is all about. We've been building up to this. So let's remove our module, and we're actually going to remove the module and all the files under it. I have a Mr. Toolkit module that I told you about earlier. It's on this machine already. I typically work out of a GitHub folder, so mine don't import automatically, because I've found when I'm switching branches and stuff and I have things open in the ISE, you can end up saving code over the top of other code that you don't mean to save. So I would rather import it manually. This is my development branch. So I've got a PowerShell function for creating a script module. It's a template. It's called new Mr. Script module. It's part of that Mr. Toolkit module. So what I do is run new Mr. module. I specify all the stuff you would specify with a module manifest, and I actually require the PowerShell version on this as well. So I run that, and I'll open all the files that it created. So what it does, this is the only thing I put in my script module. So it runs get child item on the location where the script is being run. It actually excludes Pester test, and it excludes any profiles because I have profiles in this module. And then it actually .sources all of those files. So it's very simple. Every single module I write that's the only code in the script module. So it creates your manifest. And what I'll probably do later is set these where they're not asterisks, but this is good for this demo. Also have another function that's a template for creating a PowerShell function. So I'm going to create the two functions that we've been working with. And you'll notice what it does in addition to creating the function is it creates Pester test. So open up those files. So now everything is a separate file. So you've got the module manifest that we created previously, the script module. This is one of the functions. And it gives me a template like with all the comment-based help with stuff that I typically use inside a function. It creates the basic Pester test. So these are kind of like a skeleton. And the other one's going to be the same. Now we're not going to be working with the Pester test in this demo.
Just for, so I know what the heck that is. What is that?
Pester, are you talking about Pester test?
Yeah, I have no idea. Sorry.
Pester is actually, if you have Windows 10, then you've got Pester. It's a PowerShell module that's designed for unit testing. But in addition to unit testing your code, you can use it for infrastructure testing as well. So I've had scenarios where like a SQL server, you can ping it, you can check the services, everything is working fine, but it'll stop responding to queries. So if you tried to query it, it wouldn't respond. So I have some unit tests set up, some infrastructure tests. Actually, I've got an example in this demo, so it's coming up. And just to finish what I was saying, I have some unit tests that I'll run, and it'll like check everything I just said. Can I ping it? Are the services running? And it just does a really stupid query on SQL. It does a select name from sys.databases to see if it contains a database name master. And if it does, then that was successful, because even that query won't work when these servers have these problems.
So have you ever heard of test-driven development? Okay, the idea and the notion is you write your test first, and then you write your code. That's the idea, and that's the implementation. That's part of the reasoning for a reason Pester was built, was to allow you to write your test and then write your code to pass the
You
test.
can write your test around applications that don't even exist.
Yeah. So if you go out to my
You can fake it out and
Mock them, yeah.
yeah.
if you go out to my blog, I've got an article about why isn't test-driven development more widely adopted and accepted by the PowerShell community, and it kind of shows you the workflow. But I created a module also that actually walks me through my test-driven development. So you'll write part of it and it'll say, is the code complete? And if you say no, then you keep writing code and it keeps running the test every like 30 seconds. And it tells you if it passes or not. So I'll be writing code in the IC and the test will be running in the PowerShell console. And you'll see you'll actually get these red messages, saying that it failed. And then when you're done, it'll actually succeed. I'm not sure if I have a success one in here, but I have that in this, some of that in this slide, in this demo as well.
Another way that I've used it is I've set up the test, and then when I make a change to a module months later, I'll rerun the test, make sure the same results come back out.
Exactly.
I know I haven't broken the rest of my system.
Yep. And that's actually a really good way to use it, because you can write code and everybody's always scared to modify existing code that's working fine. But if you have really good unit test, then you can go modify the code 6 months later and you can run that test to see if you broke any of the existing functionality when you were adding new functionality. Okay, so
Did we get to your answer? Okay. Making sure.
yeah, just
Testing.
I'm helping you out here, Mike. That's the reason I asked.
yeah, thank you. But the module's on your machine. If you ran a git module, I say it is. It's not imported. There it is. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I haven't updated the code in those two functions. So we got our two functions like we had before, but they're in separate PS1 files, very similar to what we were .sourcing when we started. So if I run git command on my module, you'll notice I have the same two functions just like I would have if they were all in one file. And if I ran it the other way, it's the same information. or make one slight change. So the only thing I've done is I required the AWS PowerShell module in one file. So I'm going to re-import the module. I'm going to run one of my commands just to show that it still works. But when I run git command this time, guess what? Look at all those commands. And you can't even see the list here. I could run it a different way and give you the list there. But if I run a count on it to show you how many commands it has, you know, my module has 2 commands. So how did I get 1,792 commands?
With the require statement, you got that?
Yes.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, that's a bug. I mean, so if I run test Mr. functions to export, which is a Pester test that I wrote. So if I run this, what I can look at is it was expecting 2 functions to be exported, but it was 1,792. And a couple of tests passed, but then that one failed. I actually wrote another one that I can run get Mr. functions to export, and it'll give me the list. And I don't show this, but I have another parameter that I can get the output a different way in an array instead of a comma separated list. What you can do, you can actually pipe that to clip.exe. Guess I could just go paste it in another tab. So it's on my clipboard now. So I had this semi-automated, and there was a bug in update module manifest where if you had a types to process or formats to process, then it would update module manifest would fail. So I would actually pipe this to the clipboard and just paste it in there and save it. And that was better than the alternative. Oh, and I did show you the simple here. But you can run update module manifest now, and I can run my function to get the list, and I can update it without having to do anything. So now I can say yes. And you'll notice it actually added all of those commandlets in the AWS module to my commandlets to export. And what I want you to notice, so I have another blog article saying beware of the update module manifest commandlet, because nowhere in this did I say update commandlets to export. But it went out and found those commandlets and thought it was helping me. And I hate commands that do that. Do what I told you to do and nothing more. They're trying to save you from yourself, and I don't want to be saved. And here's the blog article. So what needs to happen when you run this is you actually need to set these to an empty array. So now if I look at it, it's the way I want it. So I've got 2 commands specified in functions to export, nothing in commandlets to export. And let's just run one of our commands again. So it does work. If we run test Mr. functions to export, guess what? Success. So if you have a require statement and you have an asterisk in your module manifest, it will think all the commands that are part of that module are part of your module when you're using non-monolithic script module design. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Does it do that with anything else besides modules? And do it nothing else, right? As far as require statement, like if you put requires version something.
Yeah, all that's fine. I haven't ran into another problem, and this problem was actually when they fixed the update module manifest commandlet. Let's see. When they fixed this bug, and this was somewhere with PowerShell version 5, they actually changed the way it works, and it created this problem. Because I presented this for my user group back in January, and I hadn't ran through the demo since I updated my PowerShell version, so my demo kind of blew up. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Now, if you're using private functions, you still need to dot source them, but you just wouldn't list them in functions to export. They still need to be loaded. Do we have any questions?
Let's see how to turn that here on. Over there. A little warm in here, Mike. Just looking for the temperature.
Okay. But I have that Mr. Module toolkit. I have some really cool functions. Like if I change over to a GitHub repository, you can see that it changes my prompt, and that's done with PoshGit. So if I changed out of it, then it would change it back to a PowerShell prompt. So it looks like a bash prompt when I'm in a GitHub repository.
Thanks, dude. No wonder it was so loud in here, because the air was on earlier.
It's 80 degrees in here right now.
Is that what it was?
So this is that Mr. Toolkit module. And you'll see there's lots of functions in there. Now you'll notice I have a private folder, and some people will break their functions up into private and public folders. It really doesn't matter since they all have to be dot sourced anyway, but I did break my private. I have one private function that's in here. But these are miscellaneous ones. And then if you look at some of my modules, there may not be very many commands at all. So like, that's my Active Directory module. There's only 3 commands in there. So a lot of times at work, we have a problem where somebody has stale credentials saved in Credential Manager or in their phone or something, and they change their password and then they keep getting locked out. 5 minutes later, they call back and they're locked out again. Well, I can run this command here. It'll query the event logs on the on the domain controller. I think it's the PDC emulator, where all the lockout events are transmitted to. And it'll tell me what device is locking them out. So it's like, hey, you need to go check that device. It's got stale credentials. So did this session make sense to you guys? Did you learn anything?
Yeah, absolutely.
Pester.
It will change your life for the better.
I want to show you a book. There's only one. Well, actually, I have a couple of slides. Let me cover my couple of slides. Okay. So I have a new book that's PowerShell 101. It's halfway done, and actually Thursday I'll be publishing another chapter to be 60% done, but you can buy it now if you're interested, and you'll get the chapters as they're written. And with every chapter I've written, I've raised the price, just like $1 more. So I started out really cheap. But anyway, if you know somebody who's just getting started with PowerShell, it's a good book for them. And then I have a couple more books I mentioned earlier I took part in, so they're available now. And then there's my blog, Twitter, LinkedIn. If you want my email address, go out to my About page. It's actually encrypted on that page, but it's really easy encryption. So see if you can break it with PowerShell. And then there's my user group. We meet online virtually every month. We normally meet on the second Tuesday of the month, but this month is I'll be at the PowerShell Summit, so we're going to probably meet on the third Tuesday of the month.
And we normally meet here the first Tuesday of the month, Mike.
Okay.
Usually.
There's a Pester. This is the only Pester book that I'm aware of. It's written by Don Jones and Adam Bertram. I've actually got this book. I bought it myself, and it's a really good book. I didn't realize it says this book is 70% complete. I thought it was done, but
Well, they keep updating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew they kept updating it. But they've got there's a number of books that I've got. There's actually there's a bundle. So I actually have all these books, the DSC book, the Pester book, the PowerShell scripting and tool making book. And I really like the idea of the SlingPub site because their books anyway are for forever editions. So they'll keep updating these books. And that's one of the reasons that it costs so much is because once you buy it, you don't have to buy another version of it. If you're like me, I mean, I've been doing PowerShell since version 1, and I'll probably be doing it forever, you know. So it's very beneficial. But do we have any other questions or anything anything that wasn't covered in here that you have questions about? I certainly don't know everything.
When you do your for loop or whatever it is in the actual PSM1 file, you loop through to pull in the functions. I saw a tweet or a blog post about how to do that faster if you have a large library of functions. Do you remember that post at all?
Yeah, I think, let's see, I did see that. I saw a tweet about that as well.
It was like whether or not to use a star, or there was some better way to make it quicker so your module imports as fast as possible.
Yeah, I do remember seeing that, but I don't remember the details of it. Warren Frame is another guy that's doing his modules this way. It could have been him.
Yeah, I don't remember what it was. I remember
Cookie Monsters.
Yeah. I don't think it was him that posted it. I think it was somebody else, but there was multiple comments. I was wondering if you were doing it that way or if you were doing it just the star or whatever the easiest way is.
I did see that, and it was interesting, but I haven't had a performance problem, so I was like, hey, I'll keep doing it this way, and if I ever have a performance problem, then I'll go look at it. And you could possibly use, yeah, now it's going to drive me crazy if I can't find that article.
I saved it somewhere, but I forgot now.
I'm sure normally I favor like all these tweets, so I'm sure I've got it as a favorite. Yeah, I've got like 4,200 likes.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, it's something like it took his module 12 seconds to load when you did import module.
Oh, was it that guy from India? What is his name?
But then we did this new way of this with some tweaks to whatever that's before each object loop. It was like 2 seconds. So like when his code ran, or when he was importing a module, just.
I remember what you're talking about now. You mentioned that.
Oh, I think I remember seeing it. I thought it was cool, but also just like Mike didn't think about being that important right now. Just was wondering if he had done that or not.
Looking for it real quick. If I find it, I'll tweet it out. I'm a big believer in personal branding, so I go by Mike F Robbins everywhere. So if you want to find me on Twitter or whatever. I see something here. Performance is dot sourcing slower than just reading a file. This was from back in January. Maybe this is it. You know, when I import my module, let's see. So it's not imported. So if I do import module, and this is my largest one. It does take a second to import it, but not that long.
So I've also heard with like doing dot sourcing versus import module, it makes a difference when you're running a script on a remote computer. You know much about that? Because I saw where it says if you dot source it, it doesn't count towards the double hop issue. But if you do an import module, it might, and then not run your module. Have you heard that one before?
I haven't heard that, but I would say that that's false
Okay.
because it ends up on your function PS drive either way. So if I ran, let's do this. New module, Mr. Toolkit. So I just removed the module I imported. I don't know if that nailed it. So that actually, oh, no, I'm typing in the wrong thing. It should be that. There we go. So if I remove it, so right now it's not on the function PS drive. When I import that module, it's no different than dot sourcing it. It ends up on the function PS drive. The only difference is the source. So now if I say dot,
But would that source have to be local to that computer instead of like on a remote computer?
yeah, and it would still be local to the computer.
Can you use UNCs with import module? I've never tried.
So if I did this,
I think we tried it at one point.
You did? I've never
I think
tried
it
it with a
worked.
UNC.
It worked for like our regular screen, but when we tried to do remote computers like scheduled jobs and stuff like that.
And they try to do it with a UNC,
Like
it wouldn't
major
work?
PS session, it just didn't
Yeah.
like it.
so,
We tried to share one module with a bunch of people.
Oh, yeah, gotcha.
yeah. So if you see these bottom two, they don't have a source or a version, but they're still on the function PS drive. What I found, the easiest way to get around the double hop problem is if you had some credentials in here, and these are not valid, of course, but if you ran something like invoke command minus computer name on server 01, and inside that you needed to access something on a different machine, if whatever that is you're running that's on the different machine, if I get something from a different computer, and let's see, typically I would specify a credential, and I would do this here because I probably need domain admin privileges to do that. Well, if get something has a credential parameter, you can actually, you can use the using scope modifier and put your credential in there, and that won't count against the double hop.
Wow, cool.
That's cool.
And that way you've stored your credentials in a variable, so you're not having to type them in twice either.
And you didn't have to pass it in as a dash argument either.
Yeah, that's nice, because that's the way I always do is with all.
Yeah, I've done stuff like that with dash argument. That's pretty.
And then you put the param block in front of it.
Yeah,
Using the PowerShell 3, that's what
so the using scope modifier requires PowerShell 3 is the only gotcha. I support 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.1.
Cool.
Any other questions? What time is it where you're at, Mike?
9:03.
Well, I guess we did pretty good.
It's bedtime.
Almost time for, it's beer 30, right?
So are any of you guys going to the PowerShell Summit next week?
Yes.
Okay, I'll see you there.
I would be, but I'm going to the one in Europe next month.
Yeah, I would. If I had the choice, I'd go to that one as well.
So I only had so much money, so I had to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
It shows the other. So speaking of which, that leads me into next month. I'm not sure who we're gonna have speak because the first Tuesday I'll be out, and the second Tuesday I'll be out. So hopefully I can get Tom Towns, thank you, to speak next session. He said he would. I just hoping he was here tonight.
I got one last thing.
Okay.
So when you create a demo, I write code to undo the demo. So all I have to do is select this and run it, and notice it gets rid of everything. It deletes all the files I created. It sets my font back to the right size, and now it's pristine, and I can run my demo again. So every time I write code to undo what I did. So because I presented this a few times already.
Oh, can't read it.
Yeah, you can't read it now.
Oh, much better.
So it's not much to it, but some of the demos are complicated when I'm doing like desired state configuration, that I'll undo the configuration. But this, I really like the way that this is designed because I can go grab just this. Let's see. Where it's a big deal is when you start sharing your stuff. So you can go to my Mr. Toolkit module, and I can go grab one thing, you know. I can get Mr. Uptime. I don't have to get the entire module. I can just grab one piece of code. Like I use this out Mr. Speech. I have my Pester test talk to me and tell me if it was successful or not.
Dave.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
Let's see what's in this profile.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's one I've got.
Do you have Mr. Rickroll?
I don't have Mr. Rickroll, but I know what you're talking about. So see, my SC, I set the zoom to 100 every time I open it. But then there's another profile here. So this says, hey, if it's like the second Tuesday of the month, then it actually updates my help and runs update module, and it puts a file in a certain location. So if I open it again the same day, it won't run again. And it actually checks the packet publishing book of the day, and it tells me what the book of the day is. Free book of the day.
So your recommendation is to basically have one PowerShell file for each function versus having multiple functions in a file?
Exactly. You know exactly what's been changed. If I go back,
It's a lot easier to fix something when it's smaller than it is if it's big and
That's true.
monolithic. I mean,
yes.
man, I can't tell you how many times I've,
Try to find stuff.
yeah, and you can't ever find it, or you change it and you're like, oh my goodness.
Instant line.
Where in the hell did
I think you're on
change
this
that.
screen and you're over here typing.
Yeah.
Okay, if we have no more questions, I think I'm all done with my session. Once you start writing your code this way, then you'll kind of get it. You'll kind of understand it better. And once you start writing it this way, you'll never go back.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.